Hey folks, ever since Blizzard announced several weeks ago that the player housing early access would be launching the week of December the 2nd, it really hasn't taken any sort of genius to work out when patch 11.27 was going to be releasing, which means it really wasn't a surprise when this week Blizzard announced that yes, 11.27 will indeed be dropping on the 2nd for North America, the 3rd for the EU, and the 4th for the Far East. Now, I don't know about all of you, but with so much news and focus on the midnight testing cycle, it's been pretty easy to forget that we're not actually done with the War Within's content train. And that's especially the case for player housing fans, for whom the launch of early access has pretty much completely drowned out any interest in the rest of what the patch is offering. In case you have forgotten, patch 11.27 will also be bringing the final chapters of the War Within's campaign storyline, which, similar to the end of Dragonflight, will be acting as a bridge into Midnight, introducing a few of the new key characters, including the long missing in action Farisa Windrunner and Illyria and Turalian's son Aratar. That is not all that the patch has to offer for lore fans, with the addition of another new storyline, the Elves of Quel'Thalas, to lore working, which will offer a retelling of the Scourge's attack in Quel'Thalas, along with the Lich King's attack in the Sunwell from Warcraft 3, and an opportunity to revisit the Void Elf introductory storyline. Beyond that, there is a very light refresh to the Exiles Reach storyline with the addition of Rathian, Caligos, and either Jaina or Thrall, along with a brand new returning players introduction which will begin in the Arathi Highlands, hopefully offering a much smoother on-ramp for a segment of the player base that has been very poorly served with the current level up experience. And looking beyond that, the ever popular and much requested Brawler's Guild is finally making its return the following week of the 9th of December, with 4 brand new bosses being added to the previous lineup. As before, this is set in the Brawlgar Arena in Orgrimmar, or Bismo's Brawl Pub, which is under the Deep Run tram in Stormwind, and will allow us to progress our character through 7 tiers of solo boss encounters, while earning the Brawler's Gold currency, in what for me has always been one of the most organically social features in World of Warcraft. As well as the brand new bosses, there are also 2 brand new mounts, the Brawling Bruno and the Ballistic Bronco, and of course some brand new housing trophies, including the Brawler's Barricade, a punching bag that I do so hope will act as a target dummy in our new homes, and the Champion Brawler's Gloves for making out the entire progression track. Many of the other older favourite rewards are also making a return, including the Pugilist's Powerful Punching Ring, which offers a teleport back to your faction capital on a 1-hour cooldown, something that's super useful for all those collectors out there. Sadly though, there is no wraparound questline for the Brawler's Guild this time around. That was for me one of the most successful aspects of the Brawler's Guild last outing in Battle for Azeroth, so this omission is something that is a little bit of a disappointment. In the past, the Brawler's Guild was removed at the start of a new expansion, but this time around there is no word if that will also be the case. But with several developer interviews in the recent past saying that the team wanted to bring back the Brawler's Guild in a more evergreen way, I'm personally hoping that it will continue into Midnight, hopefully with a few more updates to help keep it relevant. Also coming in the new patch is the launch of Shadowlands Timewalking. Now you might, like me, think that this feels a little bit early for us to be seeing Shadowlands being added to the Timewalking lineup, but in fact it's pretty much right on schedule. The Battle for Azeroth Timewalking that we also got this expansion was actually due in Dragonflight, which otherwise hadn't seen any Timewalking updates. One thing though that is still missing in action is a brand new Timewalking raid. The last of those was Firelands, which was added back in Battle for Azeroth, meaning that a Mists of Pandaria Timewalking raid, ideally Throne of Thunder, is now many years overdue. Shadowlands Timewalking will be adding 3 new mounts, Bonecleaver's Skullbore, the Crimson Lupine, and the Snowpaw Glimmerfur Prowler. This will be launching the week that the patch releases as part of another round of Turbulent Timeways, which based on data mining will be running through to February the 10th. As with previous Turbulent Timeways events, completing dungeons will award a stacking XP buff, and achieving 4 stacks by doing 4 dungeons For any 5 weeks during the event, we'll also award another mount. But this time around, that mount is going to be a little bit different. Instead of simply awarding you a mount, the Master of Turbulent Timeways achievement will be awarding you a voucher, which can be exchanged for your choice of 1 out of 4 different mounts. The Bronze Aquilin, the Bronze Corpsefly, the Bronze Wilderling, and the Bronze Gravewing. The previous Turbulent Timeways mounts were eventually added to the Timewalking vendors, and my guess is that the 3 of these mounts that you do not choose will also become available for Timewalk badges in due course. This does mean that if you're a keen mount collector, you're going to be needing to save up 30,000 Timewalk badges in total. And finally, for fans of heritage armor sets, it turns out that the Pandaren haven't been forgotten by the developers. Pandaren characters will be able to return to the Wandering Isle to help the residents with a spirit festival gone wrong, and that will be awarding new Transmog sets with 3 different colour schemes to choose from. Unfortunately for fans of Drakthir, there is still no word of a heritage set for you, and in one developer interview, the Pandaren sets was described as being the last. Now, I do hope that was just a slip on the developer's part and they haven't really forgotten about the Drakthir. But before we do get that brand new patch, there are still a couple of other updates in the pipeline that are going to be arriving a little bit closer. First of all, the Delves challenge boss, Nexus Princess Ky'veza, has had some major nerfs in both difficulty levels, which focus on what is probably the most troublesome part of the encounter, Dark Massacre, which is where you have to face those shades to avoid being one-shot. The time delay for those shades attacks is being increased from 2 to 3 seconds, and the margin for error when you face them is being significantly increased. That latter change is by far the most important nerf, especially for players who have very high ping, as the game often struggles to track player positioning accurately enough when you do have a lot of lag. This nerf did prompt some very depressingly familiar reactions from certain parts of the community, with the main complaint being that it somehow invalidates the achievements for people who managed to do it in the first week prior to the start of Season 3. For me, this is a supremely weird take. Nerfing difficult bosses to open up content to more of the playing player base has been a staple of World of Warcraft as far back as Ahn'Qiraj in vanilla, and defeating bosses pre-nerf was for a very long time a major source of prestige in and of itself. Defeating Nexus Princess Ky'veza in week 1 while wearing just Season 2 gear was a massive achievement. And it is one that is no longer possible, thanks to us all being kitted out in Season 3 gear. But that effective nerf, due to all of that gear, does nothing to take away from the original accomplishment. Furthermore, in my opinion, it really does not make sense to tack an encounter as difficult as pre-nerf Nexus Princess Ky'veza onto the otherwise relatively easy Delve content, as it just creates a situation where the tail end of Delves has this bizarrely large difficulty jump. Don't get me wrong, I do think that there is a place for Mage Tower S difficulty solo content. I just think that it would be better if that content stood on its own 2 feet, rather than trying to ride on the coattails of much easier content like Delves. Now, along with that new development, we also have a couple of other events to get through before 11.2.7 drops. The first of these is coming this Sunday, the 16th, which sees the launch of World of Warcraft's 21st anniversary event. At the time I'm uploading this video, we have not yet had a preview for the event, and if that preview does arrive before this video goes live, I will link it down below. But there are some clues to the event to be found in the Trading Post Traveller's Log, which very surprisingly includes the Blackrock Depths raid. In fact, all of the favourites from last year's anniversary event do seem to be making a return, including the Chromie scenario and the Fairground event area. This event will be running for just 3 weeks this year, and I do wonder if it will have any new rewards to offer. But last year's event did turn out to be a pretty generous source of Time Warp badges, meaning it could be worth checking in on it anyway, in order to get a head start on all of those badges that you will be collecting anyway for the Shadowlands mounts. And of course, the other upcoming event will be Phase 4 of Legion Remix, which is coming with the weekly reset. This will open up access to Argus and the Argus campaign, along with the Antorus raid and the Seat of the Triumvirate dungeon, and of course a bunch of fresh rewards rewards, the highlights of which include a set of Remix exclusive Ray and Ruin Strider mounts. This is the final drop of Legion content for Remix. There is still a final Phase 5 that will be coming 3 weeks later, which we don't know an awful lot about, other than it will be including a bunch of new housing rewards. My own personal guess is that it will include some kind of turbo boost like event with accelerated progress and some extra bonus bronze to help us catch up in any of the rewards that we will still be missing. And that's it for retail updates this week, which means we can now move over to the midnight testing, where we saw the transition from alpha to beta, which has opened up that testing to a lot, and I mean a lot more users, including people with the Epic Edition pre-orders. Now I think that pretty much all the old hands at MMOs probably expected that the influx of a relatively large number of players onto just 3 realms would turn out to be a bit much for the poor servers, and that turned out to be the case, with character creation and character copy brought very quickly to their knees. And for those who did manage to get past the loading screen boss, it's fair to say that server stability was no better. While the servers have cooled down a bit by now, there are still plenty of residual issues, including extreme lag affecting the midnight introduction, and for many players, unfortunately, persistent game crashes. Issues like this are always super frustrating, especially for those people who have still not been able to actually manage to get onto the servers, and I totally understand why people who paid for access might feel a little bit let down. But at the same time, for an MMO, stability issues and crashing during testing is to be expected, and this week will have served as a very effective stress test for Midnight, providing the team with some very useful data and of course bug reports, which will hopefully help them to make the real launch day experience a lot smoother. Well, at least we can hope that's the case. For me personally, I kind of find it difficult to get angry with this in testing realms, as I know that the stability will only improve from here on, and that in a week or so this will all be forgotten. If you do have access to the beta, then once things do settle down, I would suggest that one of the most useful areas to test are the new user interface improvements. With the restrictions and add-ons to come, the default user interface is going to very likely have to do a lot more heavy lifting for players. And if you feel there are still gaps in the default user interface or any issues, I do encourage you all to make sure that your feedback is heard by Blizzard, using either the in-game options to submit feedback or via the beta forums. Speaking for myself, while the new Transmog system is still unfinished, it is possible with some chat command trickery to call up its user interface and get a bit of an early preview, including the ability to apply different transmog sets to different situations. Those situations mainly focus on location, with options for rest areas, inner houses, open world, delves, dungeons, raid, arena and battlegrounds, or even, surprisingly, the character select screen. And that comes along with some mounting options and also options for different specializations. And for Worgen and Drakthir, you will be glad to know that you are getting options to have different transmogs for your different forms. One thing though that was missing that I would have liked to have seen was an option for being in combat. I normally play most of my characters with no helmets, but especially my tank and main, I would love an option to have it don a helmet when it goes into a fight. Going back to stress testing the Midnight beta again, and this Monday we're going to be getting a very rare PvE Play with the Blues event to stress test the Midnight pre-patch event, which will be set in the Twilight Highlands. Play with the Blues events generally mean that testers will be able to play alongside Blizzard's QA team and the odd developer, and for as long as I can remember, these have been mostly limited to just PvP events, where it is otherwise often quite hard to get enough interest to test them properly. Expansion pre-patch events have long been troubled with performance and stability issues, with the War Within's event being notable for needing an almost complete gameplay overhaul a couple of days after its first release, and I suspect that this event is aimed at trying to avoid a repeat of that issue by getting a lot more players than normal to join in. This test will be taking place on its own dedicated realm called the Midnight pre-launch event, and players will need to copy their character over from retail detail in order to participate. And it'll be running from 11 AM Pacific time, that's 8 PM CET, through to 1 PM Pacific time or 2200 CET. This will require the midnight beta client. So while Blizzard did not mention it in their announcement, I do suspect that you will have to already have access to beta in order to participate. Now, just to set all of your expectations, usually with these events, we don't see very much of the blues in action beyond the odd server announcement, so don't expect to be seeing little blue Blizzard badges everywhere. But the events often do get rounded up, with the developers surprise spawning a few old school bosses with ridiculous amounts of health to wreak havoc on us all. And when that happens, it is a ton of fun. Now, in terms of new developments for the beta, Blizzard have seemed to try to limit their changes this week in a seemingly vain hope of giving us a more stable beta launch, with the only possible significant discovery being the data mining of a bunch of achievements, which will be controlling how the dungeons will unlock during leveling. I put the list up on screen, but having leveling dungeons gradually unlock as we level up really isn't anything new, even though it seems to have come as a bit of a surprise to some commenters in the community. But what is new, that as well as level brackets, the dungeons can also alternatively be unlocked by completing certain campaign quests. It is important to say that this is an or and not an and thing, and it does appear that the developers' plan is to unlock dungeons as we reach relevant parts of the story, albeit with a backstop to unlock them anyway at certain level breakpoints for people who prefer to level up through other means such as dungeon spamming. And finally, of course, it would not be a midnight beta update without at least some mention of add-ons. The biggest news on that front was a very in-depth developer post from Game Director Ion Hazzikostas, which covered the reasoning behind why the team have been locking down add-on functionality as hard as they have. In the post, Ion explains how in the past they were happy to just occasionally step in when a particular add-on went too far, but that in the last few expansions they've seen a kind of drip feed process where add-ons have been gradually pushing the limits further and further rather than simply jumping over them. This has forced the developers to respond by tightening up mechanics and relying increasingly on reaction time tests. Ion then goes on to answer the why now question by explaining that it is in part due to feedback from the community that at least some of us have been agreeing that add-ons are going too far. And of course, the team felt that this was a change that they could only do on an expansion boundary. Now, speaking for myself, I have noticed that over especially the War Within, I have been expanding the capabilities of my own user interface, adding things like Omni CD and Plater, things that in the past I had managed perfectly well without. And as a member of a mom and pop guild, we have seen a few people drop off as they have been struggling a bit with the increasing need for faster and faster reaction times. So a lot of what Ion did say kinda does resonate with me. But at the same time, it was also a little bit disappointing. Ion made no acknowledgement or recognition of his and his team's role in this escalation. World of Warcraft is built by Blizzard's team too, not by the player base, nor even add-on developers, and the difficulty level has always been entirely within their control. In my opinion, their push to increase difficulty to try and match add-ons capabilities has been entirely focused on the high end, especially the race to world first. And this is a major factor in the currently unsustainable, ever-increasing gap between heroic and mythic raiding, something that has been leading many mythic raid teams to burnout, along with ever-increasing barriers to entry for new players. And it's not just raiding that's been affected by this. Season 1 of the War Within's Mythic Plus was very unpopular for a reason, and that reason, in my view, was a failed attempt by the development team to push the bar for Mythic Plus 10s up closer to that high-end minority. In reality, for many of us mainstream players, the driver for us to adopt those more powerful add-ons has been the need to try to keep up with the top end's escalation. And in my opinion, had Blizzard focused more on the mainstream majority of the player base, I'm not convinced we'd have reached this point. And while taming add-ons will help to slow that escalation down at the top end, I also fear that instead of narrowing the gap between heroic and mythic levels of play, it's only going to widen it even further unless Blizzard change that focused on the top end. As for add-ons themselves, this week Blizzard have announced one important change, which is that they're going to be adding the ability for the developers to selectively grant add-ons access to full spellcasting information for certain spells, while continuing to restrict access to the majority of them. The developers will be working through which spells they want to open up in the coming week, but they did share that this will include things like Skyriding and profession-related abilities. Those two particular areas are a great example of where the add-on restrictions have had a blast radius that went far too far beyond the team's goal of just preventing add-ons from trying to programmatically solve combat encounters. Skyriding has, of course, nothing at all to do with combat, and I think that most players would be very surprised if their open world Skyriding add-ons were completely wrecked to midnight, which is right now the case, and much is the same for crafters. So these are very welcome announcements, but they also form a statement of intent from the developers when it comes to delivering on the early promises that most open world add-ons would end up being unscathed. And in furtherance of that goal, Blizzard have also announced to the add-on development community that they do plan to reach out directly and work one-on-one with some add-on developers to try to dive deeper into the current remaining blockers when it comes to open world add-on functionality and of course cosmetic customization. And on that subject, with the beta opening up access for more add-on creators, we've started to see more of them becoming available for midnight, and I have been playing about with building a brand new user interface for myself, and I have been very pleasantly surprised with what I've been able to achieve. While there are still a few gaps in it, especially with the cooldown manager, I was able to build a fairly decent looking setup without LVI, and I'm feeling a fair bit more positive about the whole process right now, and I do think that there are still very likely to be even more improvements to come. And one of those improvements is very likely to be for the party and raid frames. While there is nothing concrete announced, Wowhead has managed to data mine a brand new set of unit frame assets, which very much appear to be a new way to highlight things which require dispels or other interventions from healers. Healers have by far had the most to worry about from the so-called add-on apocalypse. And while it is still too early to say how these changes will work out in practice, it is good to see these early signs that the issues that healers are facing are on the radar of the developers. World of Warcraft's user interface is getting some very major improvements, and these combined with some of the developments in the add-on front are making me a lot more confident that for the majority of us, we're going to have a decent experience in midnight. There will for sure be some casualties. Let's be honest, resistance to change is a thing, and I still do have my own personal concerns about the timescale that the developers are imposing upon themselves, but I am feeling a lot less worried about the process than I was a few weeks ago. Don't get me wrong, there are things that you're going to miss, but just as we can all manage to adapt to the user interfaces of other games when we play them, I am confident that as long as we can suppress that dreaded resistance to change, we will be able to do perfectly well in midnight. For the majority of the player base though, the ultimate acid test is going to be how our raid and dungeon encounters change. And at least for the raiders, we're not going to have very long to wait to find out, with the announcement of the raid testing schedule, which will be kicking off this Wednesday the 19th. This first round of testing wraps up on the 8th of December, and even if you're not able to make the test, I am sure that there will be plenty of live streams out there, and it may be worth a look if you're interested in how well the development team are adapting to the new add-on less-ish world. Mythic Plus testing is also due in the near future, and given the magnitude of the changes to come, I would not be surprised if we see additional rounds of testing once the development team have had a chance to gather your feedback from the first round. And that's it for this week. As always, do sound off down below with your thoughts on this week's news updates. What are you looking forward to in patch 11.2.7? And do you have any plans to jump into any of the testing opportunities on the beta? If you found this update helpful, entertaining, and even just plain annoying, then let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel to grow and help me to make more of these videos along with my other content, then hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. If you don't want to miss out whenever I release a new video, then as well as subscribing, you can follow me on social media for updates. My link's in the description below as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.